Just us three today, perhaps. That's okay.
Yep.
Um,
Eddie isn't coming. Scott isn't coming. Josh isn't coming. That's 3, and we are.
it'd be nice if
we give us that's 6 votes and 2, possibly. Okay, so I guess let's start from the top. You're going to make a list of things to go forward.
Yes, I have no idea what I meant by that, actually, but I didn't do it. I think I should take it off the list because I don't even know what it's supposed to be.
Okay.
This looks like Felix did that. Thank you, Felix.
Yeah.
I don't know about 66220. What's that?
Should probably improper C types.
Ah, yeah. Felix, did you plan to write a comment on that? Oh, he said you would, I think.
I planned to, and then I did not do so. Although during triage today, I even said, "Oh, I'm supposed to do something there." But yeah, I haven't done it yet.
Okay, that's fine. Just making sure you still intend to.
Oh, I'm vaguely aware of it. I have it on my to-do list.
There's some notes on what we were saying. What Central and I were chatting a bit about it in the pre-RC, pre-triage, and we were saying that maybe we want to kind of propose that encourage experimentation by
right. I mean, we're certainly not rushed on it since we merged the revert PR, right? So it's like we can take our time figuring out the right answer here. This is part of the idea. Yes.
Yeah, right. And specifically, maybe David and Robin can figure something. Maybe we can get some general.
Would this fall under the purview of the working group that Josh has for parity with C, or is that not really the same?
Well, it's not really active at this time, but I think it would do, or I think it could do if it were.
Right. Yeah.
Okay.
So that's a good point, though. I was going to write a comment on this. I don't exactly remember what I was going to say. Probably that we're not going to, or that we're exploring some options here, and we'll try to address we'll make a decision in the FFI and WAN working group when we get to it, but I didn't. I'll try to do it today. Felix, to merge this 64273. I think, Felix, you got some concerns around.
I wrote a comment and then I realized I didn't understand some of the notes in the line team meeting. And so I worked to try to make sure I understood them. And once I did understand them, I said, we probably do want the documentation that's being requested. Basically, someone mentioned we should have a line in the doc saying how out of line modules are treated by macros, and there's what macros see. They don't see the macro isn't going to automatically jump to the file and give you the tokenized stream from the file. It's just going to give you the fact that there's that identifier and a semicolon or whatever. And at first I was like, why would we bother documenting this since it's an error anyway? Because you're going to get a stability error. And then I realized the macro does run. The macro does see this thing, and then you see the error. So that's what convinced me, like, okay, we probably should document this.
I also
it's either documented or figure out some way. It's either documented or figure out some way to have the error happen before the macro runs. But that seems bonkers, right?
Won't they see it in unstable? Can they opt into manipulating?
With unstable, you can feature gate yourself into the.
So it seems like documenting it is fine as just document it as an unstable detail and move on with life.
Can we just leave like a span note or something? Or just like, okay.
We leave what?
Like just call help or something on, or notes on the.
You get you get a diagnostic that points to the module in question. I don't know, maybe I thought the documentation we're talking about here was like
but maybe just tweak the error a bit to maybe leave notes pointing to some issue that has some small bit of documentation or something.
But the issue is for macro authors, right? I guess the point, because my assumption here was that the person who cares about this detail is the person writing the attribute macro, who might not even run the test. They might not even test this case, and thus they wouldn't see the note.
It seems,
Good point.
but it seems unlikely that they would
not test this case. Yeah.
That and like if they wouldn't, then they probably wouldn't see whatever note we left in whatever place.
Anyway,
Point.
At this point, I've sort of thrown my I haven't completely thrown my hands. I just said to Petrochenkov, maybe you know the right place for this docs, and
I think we should.
Otherwise, I'll try to do it.
I think we can FCP merge regardless. Like this is a kind of. We're just authorizing the decision to go forward, right?
Okay. In that case, I'm happy to do the FCP merge then, based on
the same as R plus, in other words. But I do think it's a good point.
All right, I will then go ahead and do that.
Okay, one thing about so FCP cancel default behavior of unwinding. I'll do that. Is there anything else to say on it? I do want to say something about uplift though. I brought this up in the sync meeting, and Manish was like, if I can summarize, roughly speaking, said, sounds fine. We think the compiler team should do that work. So it seems like there's a sort of impasse of, I think my impression was that the Clippy team wasn't too enthusiastic about going through and making a bunch of random PRs. So maybe there's some more discussion needed here, but I think the plan to do it piecemeal by piecemeal is fine. The question is who will do it? Probably nobody. And that seems okay. Like if nobody cares enough to write the PR, I'm okay with it.
I think different people will do it at different times, and it can take a year or something.
All right, that's what I mean. It'll happen slowly, and
yeah,
that's okay.
It's not a big deal.
So I don't know if there's a decision needed. I think the answer is we should just close it and say we don't want to move. We decided not to move in mass, but we're good with
let's Scott do that. Let's
right. Seems fine. Okay, so I don't think we have a lot of shepherding updates this week. I know I don't have any particular. Kyle, did you want to add anything from FFI Unwind? I put these two notes.
I don't see the screen.
Oh, I put in that we're still working towards measurements, and I was going to try to make an issue. So specifically, I mean measuring code size increase from having FFI functions abort when unwinding occurs if in -c.
Yeah, I think that's, I guess the only other interesting thing of note is that we plan to write that blog post for the Inside Rust blog.
Yes. I forgot what we were going to do. We were just going to summarize the things that we've been talking about, basically, right?
Yeah, and I think it was also somewhat a call for participation. I'm trying to find your comment about it from last week.
Seems good.
Okay, let's see.
I haven't done anything on the DIN trait, but I do want to note there was, well, one thing did happen, I think, since we talked last week. This is about the unsoundness. Specifically, I think LQD or someone did a little bit of analysis on the regressions, right? We reran the results, 60 crate versions regressing. I haven't dug further into this, but it seems to back up the, you can see a lot of them are also the same crate, just different versions of the same crate. It seems to back up the idea that the impact of this is non-trivial, but focused on a relatively narrow set of crates. I'm not sure what I should do as the next step, actually, so I wouldn't mind a little thoughts on that.
Maybe land something as unstable, or so write write up some RFC maybe?
Right. So I was considering writing an RFC describing the problem and the proposed solution. I think I could do that without too much difficulty. I think this branch could easily be turned into a future compatibility warning. I would like to have a sort of open RFC before we land that, ideally, or some write-up at least. I guess that's kind of the direction to go into.
Right. That makes sense.
So what I'll do is prepare an RFC, try to adapt the branch to the future compatibility warning, or I'll probably talk to Blitzer about doing that.
With respect to conservar, we have one branch that adds mutable references. And we have one branch that is adding if match and stuff, and loops shouldn't be too far away. And so the question, so what we need to do is like add more tests and stuff.
What is place?
Place expression.
Okay. And I don't know what that is. Like a borrow of a place? Is that like some operator that we, didn't we remove the like placement new? That's not placement new.
No, it's just an expression that refers to a place.
Like a local variable?
Yeah.
We don't support local variables in const eval?
Not, you cannot usually borrow them. No.
Okay.
You can mutate them directly, but you can't take.
So it's just a mutable borrow expression you're just saying?
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, so
it's a very radical proposal.
Seems fun. There's no T. These are extensions to what are permitted inside constants. That's the idea.
Yeah.
Okay. I don't understand what this type is all about. Or you're just saying you permit the type variables to have this type or something?
Yeah.
Okay. Seems okay. All right, let's move on from that. We got some interesting stuff coming up here. Actually, some quotes appeared.
Did you already address the action items at the top for the aborting on unsafe or aborting on undefined?
We didn't say a lot except that I was supposed to write something and didn't. Do you have opinions?
I mean, I think I stated them all in the Zulip, but I would say that those comments are possibly worth reading if Lang team members haven't done so yet. I can provide a link in the Discord.
Okay.
Just the reason being, so Josh said it was the FFI Unwind groups in scope for us at least to provide input on this. I think Adam didn't provide any input, but let's see. Yeah, I had an opinion, Central had an opinion.
This is 64315.
Yes. So Josh in that thread had said it seems wrong to change code gen based on the presence of unsafe. And I agree with that pretty strongly. So my vote would be, choose one of the other two approaches, either abort always on unwind across FFI, to stabilize that behavior that was previously stabilized and then backed out, or just stop emitting no unwind, which was another PR.
Right, I think what I had planned to write was that we will not do this. We'll basically do keep status quo while we try to investigate the overall strategy we want to take, and then based on that, that would inform our actions here, which I guess is sort of neither pro nor con, but definitely not that we would land that PR, because I think there's definitely no consensus around unsafe having a semantic effect. This is a sure statement.
Right. I guess my other recommendation was don't keep the status quo. I said, I'll just find the comment. I said, I don't think the decision can rely on the assumption that the opt-out mechanism mentioned above will be ready soon. The project group does not currently have a design recommendation ready, nor any estimated timeline for delivering such a recommendation, and therefore, I think it's in the Rust project's best interest that one of the three immediately available approaches be stabilized as soon as possible. Again, that's more my opinion than like a consensus from the project. But yeah, I don't really like the idea of indefinitely keeping the status quo, because I think the status quo is problematic.
All right, let's discuss it on Zulip then, and try to reach a consensus amongst us. I don't want to.
That's fine.
Spend the meeting right now on it because I want to try to talk about things.
Yeah.
But
I'll share the Zulip link to that topic just so that everyone.
I actually put it right here already.
All right.
Let's see.
All right.
So we don't have any updates from the German working group. I think the never type stuff landed, so it's stable on nicely now.
There should be a way to emoji react to stuff in paper.
Do we want to keep the fallback as an active shepherded item, or what's happening there?
I think we can just track it via the tracking issue stuff and the comparison.
Okay.
No need to revisit every week. So moving on to, so we reviewed last week's action items and stuff. So moving on to PI issues. Box is marked as dereferenceable for the duration of the call. Unfortunately, Ralph isn't here.
Yeah, I've been following this discussion a little bit, but I think right now it looks like there's a disconnect between like what Ralph's interpretation of what the semantics is, and it's possible the LLVM developers disagree about the intended semantics of things writing. Sorry, I'm jumping in without giving background information. There's a bunch of different issues here that are all sort of collected in my head, but the biggest one that Ralph's pointing out is that we currently put this dereferenceable attribute on box, and the semantics of dereferenceable as it stands today, we think is meant to mean this thing is dereferenceable for the entirety of the function body, which that works for like a borrowed pointer, like, you know, something of type %t, but it doesn't work for box because you can drop the box halfway through your function. So what Ralph is suggesting for this particular bug is, I believe Ralph is just, we should get rid of it. We should not emit the dereferenceable attribute for the box type, because in general it's not.
Seems like we would want something like dereferenceable in scope, where scope.
So this is where you then get into the things that LLVM is currently exploring, and I don't know if we have time to try to discuss that, but they are exploring the design space here. Someone suggested dereferenceable in scope originally, and there was some pushback against that concept, and that's led them to propose other things that Ralph is actually jumped in and said that he doesn't think that their design as proposed works for us. So there's active discussion here.
Also true that as we see in the other issue, even borrowed pointers, the dereferenceable is debatably a poor fit. Like, it's usually true, but there are some weird edge cases, notably atomic U size. It's not always true.
That's more about unsafe stuff, right?
And yes.
Anyway, my takeaway here is that it seems like LLVM themselves are sort of still trying to figure out even what the semantics they want to adopt is in the first place. And we probably do want to be part of that conversation to some extent. When I say we, I mean the Rust project. I don't necessarily mean the Lang team.
Probably the LLVM working group.
Yeah. Which I believe is what Ralph is doing right now, right? In terms of what Ralph is doing on the at least some of these threads for LLVM. So yeah, that's ongoing. But I don't know if Ralph actually demonstrated an attack or a you know, what do you call it, some way to actually make use of this.
Yeah.
But I mean, if it's theoretically unsound, then we need to do something even then.
I'm just talking about how to prioritize the fix.
Right.
There's also, this issue doesn't have any documentation about like how this will pessimize like compilation.
And that's the other question.
It's probably been true since
those
one right?
Evaluate how important it is to do it, right? So
right, we need some more testing then.
Yeah, I mean, we took off the dereferenceable from unmute at some point, and it had some impact. Presumably this would have some impact, although probably a lot less, would be my guess, since it's just less common to pass boxes around than.
Yeah.
I would be surprised if it were significant, but I'm much more worried about the ampersand and the implications there.
Yep.
I think we should try to get if we were going to try to focus on something, I would be interested in getting some time of Ralph's and focusing on dereferenceable. It seems to be, especially for the ampersand and unsafe cell interactions, if there's like immediate steps we can take to stem the bleeding, but maybe also publish.
Right. And more into the future, no alias. You need to.
Yeah.
But it might make sense to also both the LLVM working group and the Unsafe guidelines working group. Both of them.
Sure, that makes sense. All right, well, let's do nothing for today, I think, other than know that it's happening. And I'd like to talk about this pin business. Boats, I think you're the one who's been following them most closely.
One sec, just one sec. Felix, could you maybe leave some comments on the bot stuff? Do you have time?
Sure.
Go ahead, Tobias.
So yeah, this is an unsoundness that basically, should I just write code blocks inside of this or should I do them somewhere else?
Do it here.
Okay. How do I get the check? Okay. It turns out you can do Mac shit. Deref mute for tick A of my local type. This is something that we did not account for when designing the pin API. And in doing this, I have a playpen which shows the unsoundness in like less than 30 lines of code. So I should just link to that. So basically, because of this, you can make references, which shared references deref mute to a different address from the address they deref to. And so essentially you, guarantee that you have pinned one address and then use this deref mute impl to construct a pin to a different address, because pin has a method called asMute, which calls the deref mute to get a mutable reference and then returns a pinned mutable reference. And so it calls, this impl, and that now you have a pin pointing to something that you didn't actually pin. You can also do this through an impl of clone for a mutable reference to my local type, which you can also do. And the reason that these impls are allowed is because these reference types are fundamental, and so you can implement traits for external traits for references to local types. And so it turns out that yeah, you can also, that includes drefmut and clone for drefmut for shared reference and clone for mutable reference, even though that's obviously bananas and like really should not ever happen. So there are basically two possible ways to close the soundness hole. One is to add unsafe marker traits, like you could imagine unsafe pin safe drefmut, and pins everywhere where pin currently uses drefmut and now uses this unsafe marker trait. We would also need unsafe pin safe clone, and that would close the soundness hole while still allowing you to add these impls. The other approach would be to just to closing this soundness hole is to you know, make it so that these impls cannot be written by somehow reserving, you know, drefmut for shared reference and clone for mutable reference. And the third option is to do both of these things, which is like they're not, you know, really in conflict. I think I'm in favor of reserving these impls, and I'm not really in favor of adding these marker traits. Ralph, I don't know what Ralph's opinion on reserving these impls is, but he does think that we should add the marker traits. I think maybe we could focus on the question of like ignoring pin, should we reserve these marker traits, might be something that would be good to focus on, because like a part of my opinion is that pin was designed based on the assumption that, you know, the pointer types in a standard library can be assumed to behave reasonably. You know, like you can assume that shared references behave like the way the shared references are supposed to behave. And I think that all users should be able to make that assumption. And so like we should just make it so that indeed shared references never implement drefmut, because that's just like an assumption that I think is reasonable to make. And
so how do we do that?
So possibly through the reservation mechanism. Nico commented that it might not be possible with exactly how that is currently implemented, but basically as long as, if the reservation, it's like, depends on how the reservation works with specialization, basically. Like if reservation treats it as a specializable impl regardless of anything, then that doesn't work, because we can't allow you to specialize drefmut for your local reference.
Yes, sort of.
I don't believe reservation ever prevents you from writing an impl. It only, well, that's not, obviously not too strong, but I don't believe it prevents you from writing these impls. I believe what it prevents you from doing is writing impls that assume the thing we're trying to guarantee, actually. like you can't assume that &t does not implement drefmut or whatever, but right. you can implement it yourself.
Okay, because the documentation says that like talks about like specialization and like the ways in which an overlap could someday be allowed. It's possible that reservation, like,
I think what that's more saying is if you add the impl later, because people might have, this probably should be reworked, but this I think what the documentation was getting at was precisely because people could add these impls later, you can't just add the reserved impl yourself unless you can be sure that it would be allowed through some other mechanism.
I see. So yeah, I mean, I think we could also, some other special, like a rule, like some change to fundamental. It's also been asked if making drefmut and clone fundamental would solve the problem, which maybe it would, because the interaction between fundamental on traits and fundamental on types like gives me a headache. So it's possible that makes sense, but I don't know. And I also don't know if that would be too breaking.
That would help. That would allow you to make negative assumptions, but it doesn't prevent you from adding new impulse.
Okay.
Actually, I have, so there is an issue open in the reference to more formal-ish document what fundamental means.
Yeah.
I think it's pretty clear that these things are all really confusing and could use documentation.
Yeah.
And I was hoping that Nico could.
I would like to write that. You should ping me with that.
I pasted the issue.
Thank you. I think we should worry less about the mechanism. Well, we can worry about it, and we should, but I'm interested in the premise that Bo's put forward that, like, this is something worth guaranteeing. I definitely feel like overall I'm, unhappy that deref mute and deref can diverge, and I know why it's the case, and I don't know what I think is the best fix, but it seems to be a common misconception and an annoying thing in general.
Right. I mean, and it's not even like saying that you can't make bad deref mute impulse for your own types, but the fact that you can do it for the primitive reference type is pretty, seems pretty bad.
I agree with that statement.
So, I guess, I guess for now, maybe just continue the discussion on internals. I feel like I need to do a lot of reading.
Yeah, the internals discussion is mainly focused on the other question of whether or not we should add these marker traits. So
if we added the marker traits, I do think we're going to need at some point some form of marker trait around deref mute that says this is well behaved. Well, I don't need as a strong statement, but I expect us at some point to want to talk about well-behaved deref and deref mutes for the purposes of optimization and other things. Unfortunately, I don't exactly know what well-behaved means.
I think that's where my concern with these. Well, that's one of my concerns with these. My other concern, so my first opinion is that there's an underlying problem that this code is bananas and we should not allow it. But once you've solved that, then these are no longer necessary to make pin sound. And the other is that I think specifying these is actually not really clear, especially the clone one, for example, because Box's clone impl is sound even though it returns a new address, but other I think it's hard to figure out exactly how to specify that a clone is valid for pin.
It would be good to have some operational specification.
But what we do
is decidable.
But that's sort of the concept with the way that pin works is that each constructor is where we guarantee that function, given the semantics of that pointer type, that is a valid way to construct a pin. In other words, every pointer type has a different set of constructors because they each have different semantics about what.
Does this interact with the deref pure and stuff?
For sure, right? That's kind of what I meant by well-behaved.
Yeah. I think deref pure is, but deref pure is not
it's a stronger constraint, right?
Yeah, it's a stronger constraint than this because you could mutate something else in your deref mute as long as you return the same address as your deref.
Right.
And that address is somewhere that it doesn't move when the pointer moves and stuff like that.
There's probably some pithy way to explain this, through category theory or idempotency or something. That's.
It just. I think that these marker traits are really hard to specify, and that's why, the way it works right now is we specify the correctness on a case-by-case basis for each pointer type instead.
Boats, I'm trying to understand if you're saying rule out these particular impulses. If we allow them today, it seems like no matter what, we've got to deal with potential fallout
Right. I would
Just
want to do.
backwards incompatible change, right?
Yeah. So I would say, well, we do a crater run, but I have a hard time. I really hope no one has written these in real code.
They're pretty bunk. They're hard to implement correct, like in any useful way, right?
Because to
like,
return a mutable reference here, you have to have another reference in yours, like that you're like.
I guess I'm wondering about like cases where people did it on a type def or something where they didn't even realize until they had an address that they had a reference
I'm not
they're
even
dealing with.
I'll have to go look, but how do you even implement this?
With a cell.
Yeah, and you like take it or something.
Yeah. Cell replace.
Cells are so much fun.
Yeah, it takes some effort to do it for sure.
Yeah, I have a really hard time imagining this will actually break anyone, and I would like. My claim is that we should call this a soundness fix. Like it directly fixes the soundness hole in pin, but it also, I think that we should just like.
I'm sure it fixes somebody's.
The right authors of Unsafe code. Right.
Exactly. I think
probably.
I don't know how much more time I want to spend, but I would say that in terms of the mechanism, I think I have long hoped we would add a form of explicit negative impl, which would serve as a way to promise that something, basically to rule out that something can be implemented or to promise that it never will be.
Yeah,
in an explicit
like
way.
first RC, right?
Yeah, it was one of your first RCs, yeah, as I recall. And like a classic example would be like, it's annoying to me that I can't rely on the fact that box of T is not copy, since box of T will never ever be copy, and yet I cannot with today's rules. But you could imagine saying like I implement not copy for box of T for all T. It's not, it would actually be quite easy in the sense of like we could make it do what we want to have this mechanism, but I'm like not super, I think there's an obvious like reservations, but different because this is unbounded in time. The only fix to solving that would be to, somehow address negative reasoning in a more coherent way. Note that I'm saying negative impulse and not negative where clauses.
Given the existing SAM as well, with respect to the type system, it feels like having a formal specification would make at least me sleep easier if we did that.
I mean, a specification of what not means would be easy.
Yeah, but like integrating it with everything else, making sure there is no accidents somewhere else due to that change.
There's none. I mean, what this is limited to, we can talk about it offline, but it would be limited to coherence. It would basically be saying, I can imagine a pretty limited mechanism that basically says, I can declare that this is not implemented, and coherence checks that all positive and negative impulse don't overlap. That's already what coherence does when you have positive and negative impulse. And so all it does is effectively prevent you from writing impulse, which doesn't have any real interaction with the rest of the language, since those are all defined based on what impulse exists. So in that sense, it's fairly targeted. But I think what's worrisome about it is not to me as much the semantics as it is the what does the full rounded feature look like? And is this a good cell part of it?
Yeah. I think people having weird, not working out people expect it to, right?
For one thing, you wouldn't be able to rely on it that would be, if we allowed you to rely on it, well, it's still relatively limited because it's incoherence, but it would be then getting more in the direction of that starts to permit code we didn't used to permit. Whereas the way I'm talking about it, I think we could pretty clearly say would only forbid code we used to permit. And not affect the semantics of code, if you see what I'm saying.
Right.
Yeah.
Should we move on? We have.
Yeah, I think we should move on. But I'm glad you gave your perspective, Buzz, because I hadn't thought about it that way.
And I think that, the thread will keep going on. We'll probably check on this again.
Cool. I will leave it nominated for now. It's probably something we can revisit over and over. Anyways, unused parents triggers on macro by example code. So we recently made the unused parents lint also work for types. type expressions. We didn't really change the lint other than that, but it seems like some code macro-based code was like relying on not having warnings, and so now people are seeing some warnings. It's not like the house isn't burning down. We don't need to like rush a decision like with the improper C types. But so one thing we could do here is to not lint on unused parents if it's from a macro, inside a macro. Me and Felix feel that this is reasonable. Like,
just the basic rule idea being that in this instance, the heuristic of like how useful, the likelihood of it being a false positive goes significantly up if it's coming from a macro. I will definitely agree that I have done exactly this trick numerous times in macros. It's a pretty useful trick.
Yeah, I agree.
I would be okay with that.
Yeah, it seems fine.
I think macro generated code, linting on it is usually pretty goofy. I guess the only thing would be if you had a big, like if in the expression, I'm trying to remember exactly how we enforce this, I don't know, but in other words, imagine that the redundant parenthesis was around the 3 here and not generated by the macro. Ideally, that would still trigger.
Yeah.
I think it would.
Yeah, we want to. We definitely want to make sure we cover that case. We check that case, understand what's behavior there, and hopefully catch it the right way. Yeah.
I guess it would be like, is the span on the parenthesis from inside a macro definition, or is it, or not?
That seems like it would work. But like worst case, I mean, this lint is mostly like your code is a bit unidiomatic.
Yeah, it's not a very important lint. In fact, I find it kind of annoying, but yeah.
Yeah.
I'm sure it's useful to people who migrate from C and put extra parens or something, but I'm usually like, I wanted those parens there. But
I think specifically in like if statements is where it's kind of useful. Like,
I think that's what it's for. Yeah.
So
all right. Seems like we're
not everyone is here, but I don't think anyone would object.
I wouldn't worry about this.
The issue also says it only happens in beta and not stable or nightly. So
I think it happens if you do it on expressions like term expressions and patterns on stable. The difference here is that it like we made the lint trigger for types, so it only happens for types on
I see.
This is all from last week. Is there anything new to say about C types? I don't think so. We just did need to write a comment still.
I will leave a comment about the unused parent stuff.
Are you putting a note for yourself? Okay, cool. Okay, nominated PRs. You want to talk about this one, Central?
Where are we? Let's see.
To tactically permit visibilities on trait items and enum variants.
Right. So this instead of enforcing, so we move. So what this PR does is it moves the restriction on not having visibilities on trait items and enum variants to a semantic one instead of a syntactic one. So for traits, this makes it easier to unify the item grammars, and for enums, well, gives you better recovery and stuff, and it would facilitate allowing it semantically one day, and it might also enable some like macro-based DSLs and such. I could see that being useful.
So the only real danger here is it's plausible, though unlikely, for this to affect some. Like this is technically backwards incompatible, I suspect. If you
I don't think so. I checked the. I don't think there are any problems with follow set ambiguity or anything like that.
I guess because you're already parsing an item and it's inside. Yeah, okay, I take that back.
Because it's in the front, but not in the end.
I mean, technically, it would fail to parse, and you could have a fallback arm that then attempts to parse it just token by token, for example, which would now no longer trigger. I don't think it matters, but I think strictly speaking, you could have a macro like this. And this will, foo bang of, will behave differently, right?
Yeah.
This is basically true for anything we do in the parser, however. So,
yeah,
we've kind of thrown up our hands at this point before, and I think
I think we need to be able to change that.
This is part of why I wish, in retrospect, I think we should never have had, like, I think all these matches should have been very simple regex-based token trees or things, but oh well, we didn't do that. Okay. So we talked about this already.
So you might want to check your boxes and stuff.
Oh yeah, this is pending there's a FCP here.
Yep. So if Felix and Box, if you check your boxes, then we are good to go.
We did this. We did this already. Did that already. Floating point to integer casts. You want to, Central? Did you want to talk about that one? This has the interesting distinction of being an open issue since 2013. Always fun.
So I don't think I can really explain what saturating and unsaturating costs are. So someone else might want to do that. But basically, we have a soundness hole from 2013, and it can give you miscompilations. And we have an unstable flag to change, which makes the thing sound, but has some performance regressions. My proposal is that we introduce some intrinsics and expose them in some form as unstable, and then we switch the defaults so that it's sound by default, and we can introduce a flag for making it unsound temporarily for some time as the flag, which is unstable. And after some time, we then stabilize the intrinsics that we have exposed as unstable in some fashion, and then maybe after even some more time, we remove the Z flag, and the compiler team can manage that.
So I have two thoughts. Well, first of all, does anyone want more detailed background? I can give mildly more detailed without going into what saturating is, which I don't think is all that important. But I will not guidance. I can say I have two questions, maybe your thoughts. One is that I don't know if we need the unsaturated floatcast, but that's a minor point. The more interesting point to me is, how do we make this decision? I feel like there's an RFC here. There's at least some surface syntax area. I mean, the basic gist of the proposal is we're going to add explicit methods for all the different ways you can, all the different modes of casting floats to ints, and we're going to pick one for what as does, right? And that one that we pick will not always be the best choice from a performance point of view, but at least it's a consistent choice, as opposed to C's crazy town behaving of you can do whatever you want, and hence trigger undefined behavior. I I think that's a great basic proposal. I just don't know, do we want to have an RFC? Do we think we can just FCP merge this because no one's really going to notice? It feels like somebody will notice, at least.
So if we want an RFC, I'm not the one to write it because then I would need to learn a lot of things about floating point math and stuff and such things. But who would write it if we do want an RFC?
An interesting question. I don't know.
This thread has 200 something comments.
It does.
I feel like it seems like now there is consensus among the people who care about the thread that it should be saturating, should be the semantics that we should choose.
You're basically are you implying this is good enough as an RFC?
That's well, wait, there's the detail. I think that the default for as should be saturating. I think there's consensus about that, but I think there's also an assumption that we have to provide the alternative entry points. And I don't know if there's consensus about what all the alternative entry points need to be. In particular, it's not clear to me whether there's agreement, whether we should have the current, whatever as currently does, which can produce undefined behavior in certain cases. Should that be offered as an unsafe method or not?
I think there is consensus that we because people want the alternatives, the unsaturated and unsafe versions, that we should provide them. But I think there is still some discussion about exactly how we expose the methods. Like, should they be on the primitive type? Should we use traits or something? And stuff.
I feel like we would. I feel like I'm not sure I'm convinced by there's an old issue with a lot of comments and therefore we don't need an RFC, but I do think that's a good argument for why the RFC could move relatively quickly. We could be aggressive about saying, well, we're not going to consider too many variations here. On the other hand, I don't think an RFC is the place to work out this API surface either. I think that works better in a PR to a certain extent.
It's also like we can just choose the default and then add those methods over time, right?
I would be happy with that solution. It seems like some people were concerned about it.
I think people are concerned about performance loss without having any way to get it back.
I think they want to path, yeah.
But we could, if we add the Z flag to change to get unsaturating stuff, at least then you can use that short term unlikely.
Yeah, but that's not very satisfying. We would like to give people something they can migrate to, right? I mean, how many, we could look, we had this thread. It seems like there's really only, is there really only 2 options or are there more?
I think there's more personally. I think that, for example, you could have, there's been some recent discussion about this whole, a reason this has been blocked for so long is because a lot of people are proposing using some sort of freeze intrinsic from LLVM to avoid the undefined behavior. You'd have non-deterministic behavior in terms of what value you get, but it would be fixed as one. It wouldn't be undef or whatever it's called. And so you'd actually have a bit pattern that would be fixed, and thus you wouldn't get undefined behavior from it. You just get unknown, a value that you can rely on. What Ralph has recently pointed out when I was asking, so I'm part of the reason this has come up again, because I was the one who posted 12 hours ago saying, hey, I noticed that somebody tweeted that LLVM does have freeze now. Can we move on this because of that? And Ralph pointed out there and elsewhere that freeze is not ideal because even though it avoids the undefined behavior, it has information leakage problems, security, you'd have potential security risks.
I don't know if that's actually, is that true in this instance? Maybe. I guess it probably is. Just pulls from some random register or something.
Having non-deterministic behavior